What is up, everybody? Welcome to MultimediaJay's Quick Flicks, a series that I haven't had on this channel since the very early days in 2006-2007. Quick Flicks was actually my very first side series, an attempt at doing some kind of side videos or something like that in between the instructional tech videos I was doing at the time. They were supposed to be shorter, but I had lots of problems with keeping them short, and so I eventually abandoned the idea when I kept making Quick Flicks videos that were actually as long as the regular ones. Nowadays, it's not so much about length, though. Nowadays, I've kind of created a gap in the various videos that I upload to YouTube, because I have the main series, like what we're looking at here. I have the main series, which basically has a lot of production type stuff going on these days, and then I have the vlogs at the other extreme, which is informal, talking about things like that, and talking about random topics and whatnot without much for production stuff. Now, the big problem I've been having lately is that some of the vlogs have been getting a little too technical, with that tech video in disguise vlog that I did earlier. So, yeah, I've decided to fill in the gap, so to speak, by bringing back the Quick Flicks series. Quick Flicks, what the heck? So these are basically going to be either shorter or simpler videos about similar stuff to the main series. So that way the vlog series can be a proper off-topic, how things have been, things along those lines type series, and not step on the toes of the technical stuff too much. So we're going to talk about something rather simple today to start off. I needed a very simple topic, and, well, here's a good one. So what I'm going to talk about is actually AMD, because I got a nice little comment. I actually got a nice little comment on my last Windows 10 versus the Dell-osaurus thing about AMD's not really a good idea. Really wouldn't use it for anything except an HTPC, da-da-da-da-da. And, of course, we can talk about AMD a lot, and I probably will talk about AMD in this series a little bit from time to time. But the big thing is, it's not just about benchmarks and winning benchmark competitions. It's really about bang for buck and stuff like that. The reason why I made fun of that system that what's-her-name was building, the person who was building her first system in that video I was talking about earlier, is because she talked about building a budget gaming rig with a Core i5. She could have probably saved some money putting an 8350 in there, instead of messing with Core i5s and stuff like that. Now, the reason why I keep saying that my current system with the 1090T from 5 years ago is in the league of Core i5s is actually because of NovaBench. So here's NovaBench's processor hierarchy, and there is the 1090T sitting squarely in the middle at 568. If we look above it, Core i7s. If we look below it, Core i5s. It's pretty consistent. Now, the big problem here is that NovaBench is a little too simplistic. This is kind of an all-in-one score that doesn't really break down single-core versus multi-core performance and 64-bit versus 32-bit computing and stuff like that. For that, we need to move up to Geekbench. So here's the Geekbench processor benchmarks for 64-bit multi-core. Okay, that wind's definitely rattling quite a bit. We have some trees that are kind of scratching the house that need to be dealt with. Maybe if spring will actually stick around, we don't end up with Arctic winds on Wednesday or Thursday nights. But anyway, so here's the 1090T, also towards the middle of the list. And this is where things get a little more interesting, because there's a couple Core i5s above it, including the 2400, which is what I use at work. And then there's actually some Core i7s below it, some of the earlier i7s from back when the Core i7 first started becoming a thing. So, but then the good news is, if we scroll over to the progress bar, we're actually closer to the top than to the bottom. Yeah, case in point. So it's nice to see that this Phenom 1090T, I think it's supposed to be Phenom, not Phenom. I just been like, I thought Phenom sounded cool, so I've been like, oh, Phenom, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's almost like hillbillies accenting every syllable or something like that. My big pickup truck, or something like that. But so this 1090T, despite being a 5-year-old processor, still holds its own, and it still plays ball with the Core i5s. The big thing that AMD's really missing is something that's actually high-end. I just want to say one thing, though, before we call it a video here. There's one major thing that's missing with these benchmark charts, whether you're talking Geekbench or whether you're talking NovaBench. We're not really seeing the price curve in here. So, yeah, cool, I could gain 100 points by going from a 1090T to an 8350, or I could go even higher to get an i7. What am I talking about in terms of improvements or performance per dollar? So this 568 divided by what the chip goes for nowadays, or compare the 8350 to some other chips as well, that's really what's missing from these benchmarks, because unless you're out to win competitions, darn strap, always finding its way in front of the camera here. Unless you're going out to win competitions, a top-of-the-line system is probably going to cost you a heck of a lot of money. Like this rich kid chip, the 5960X here. I know these Intel i7 prices can really snowball the further you get up the hierarchy. If you want a top-end system, you will still pay dearly for it, just like you've always done, which is why I tend to be kind of like average to entry-level high-end with the processors that I work with and things like that. The other big wild card is that if you're talking gaming rigs, there are numerous examples out there nowadays where your graphics card has more to do with your gaming performance than your processor. And graphics cards are a bit easier of an upgrade. Just make sure you have an adequate power supply when you upgrade your graphics card. So graphics cards are actually pretty easy. You don't have to mess with heatsink compound or anything like that. So I'd say you probably would be better off getting a moderately decent processor and then, like a lot of people are saying, put all your money into the graphics card. I've actually been surprised with this 5-year-old processor just how much I've been able to get my frame rates back up into decent levels and, get away from, or get rid of graphical frame rate issues just by getting a new graphics card. And I can play games maxed out with some eye candy turned on and things along those lines. I also, as much as on the Nova Bench side of things, as much as Tuxedo has hit 1300 something, I know I could probably increase my system a lot more by adding a second graphics card and doing SLI, because I have NVIDIA stuff right now, or it would be Crossfire if it was ATI or something along those lines. But here's the thing, I don't really need, I'm running most of my games close to maxed out as it is, if not maxed out entirely. So a second video card would pretty much just increase the already high power consumption. Although I think my high power consumption might have something to do with having a power supply that's a little too big, but that's another discussion for another day. Probably something in the main series eventually, but that's the thing. Computers have changed so much. The megahertz myth was never very substantial to begin with. Nowadays, it's just as dead as it gets. The megahertz myth was never really a thing anyways. You could play the megahertz game with processors of the exact same family, so to speak. But in terms of performance, there is no shortcut to PC performance besides testing the flops, the mathematical operations, and things along those lines. Stuff that involves a little bit more, just thinking and stuff, and not necessarily looking for one number to tell you everything. So, as far as AMD goes, the big thing to be concerned about, and we'll talk about this later on, is AMD represents Intel's main competition, and the reason why Intel may lower their prices or try to develop more technology. If we go back to the bad old days of the 1990s, where Intel was pretty much unchecked and processors slogged along as we headed towards 1 gigahertz and computers were expensive devices, I'm not so sure that would be a good thing for anybody if we return to those bad old days. But if you want a sneak preview, just watch the i7 prices and how much they snowball the further away you get from the i5 range, where there's still AMD competition. Because Intel's in a league of its own at the very top with how these benchmarks go these days, but how much do these processors cost? That's the one thing that's really missing from these bar charts. I would love to see something like Geekbench, but performance per dollar based on pinging like Newegg's prices or something. Or heck, I'll make a spreadsheet if I have to. But that's the thing. I wouldn't go counting out AMD just yet, and all you Intel fanboys out there, trust me, you don't want AMD to go away. No competition is going to make for a very miserable PC experience, and with how good mobile's doing versus PCs, the PC needs all the help that it can get. Right now, PCs are so totally enthusiast machines right now for gamers or system builders or something along those lines. People who want to make upgrades instead of purchases. So, AMD needs to stick around. I don't care how much you hate AMD, think they're tacky, or think they're uncompetitive, or anything like that, all you Intel fanboys out there. If AMD goes away, we go back to the 90s in terms of how hardware develops. And as much as it was a problem for net neutrality and how the internet works with going back to the 90s when your ISP affected the content that you had available online, If AMD goes away, we go back to the bad old days with processors, and that may be a problem that the desktop cannot recover from with how mobile's been taking off. Just some things to think about on this windy Wednesday evening. Well, at least that's when I'm recording it anyways. Hopefully the weather gets better. We had some good weather for a while, but now we've got winter nonsense and a snowstorm going into the weekend. It never stops for us here in New England. Till next time, this is MultimediaJay, signing off. Thanks for stopping by.